1930 was an eventful year for the 20-year-old Carmine Galante. He allegedly executed one police officer in cold blood, and then on Christmas Day, just 9 months later, he shot another. Let's check out the wild early times of the man who had become one of the most feared men in Cosa Nostra history. Welcome to OC Shorts, bringing you detailed historical snapshots of the American Mafia and other organised crime. Feel free to subscribe if you like that sort of thing. Today, we're going to take a look at the incidents where Carmine Galante allegedly shot two police officers in the space of just 1 year, all of which while still only 20 years of age. Carmine Galante will always be remembered as one of the most ferocious and feared mobsters to dominate New York City. He was a man of contradictions. A prison doctor once described Galante as neat in appearance but dull emotionally, stating that he had a mental age of 14 and a half and an IQ of 90. He was shy with strangers and had no knowledge of current events, routine holidays, or other items of common knowledge. He was diagnosed as a neuropathic psychopathic personality, emotionally dull and indifferent. The doctor's prognosis for any chance of improvement was expressed in one word: poor. However, despite the diagnosis that he had a young mental age, Galante would go on to be able to speak 3 languages and was also often known to quote philosophers such as Plato and Descartes. He was known for breathtaking acts of cruelty, such as the time in Montreal when he broke beer glasses on a restaurant floor and forced a busboy to dance barefoot on the shards. But his barbaric behaviour and supposed low IQ didn't stop Galante's rise up the Bonanno crime family. And by the time of his sentence for narcotics trafficking in 1962, he was considered underboss to family leader Joe Bonanno, as can be seen at the Valachi hearings a couple of years later. Over a decade spent in prison didn't affect Galante's fearsome reputation, and upon release he was able to muscle his way to the position of unofficial boss of the Bonanno crime family. Joe Messino would later testify that Galante was seen as the boss by members of the Bonanno Borgata, even though the official boss was actually Philip Rusty Vastelli, who at the time was locked up in prison. When asked about his induction into the Bonanno family, Messino's testimony went as follows. Prosecutor: why was Carmine Galante there? Messino: he became the new boss. Prosecutor: he was there as boss? Messino: as boss. He reiterated this again when discussing who he reported to directly after being inducted into the family. Prosecutor: who were you placed with? Messino: I was placed with Nicky Glasses. He was the underboss. Prosecutor: what happened after 6 months? Messino: then I went with Carmine, who was the boss. Prosecutor: who was deciding to move you around in that time frame? Messino: Carmine Galante. Prosecutor: what was his position at the time? Messino: boss. And so let's go back and take a look at a couple of incidents that contributed to the ferocious gangland legend of Carmine Galante. It's the 15th of March 1930, and NYPD officer Walter Oliver de Castillo had been serving on the force for 9 years, and he was stationed at the 84th Precinct in Brooklyn Heights. That morning, he was tasked by his station sergeant to handle security for Martin Weinstein's shoe factory on the corner of York and Washington Streets, whilst the owner was handling cash for the payroll of his employees. Officer de Castillo and Martin Weinstein were in an office on the 6th floor of the building, and there was $7,500 in cash being readied into envelopes for employee wages. Meanwhile, 5 men approached the building and entered. One pulled a gun on Louis Seller, the elevator operator, and forced him to take them to the 6th floor. Whilst de Castillo sat watching Weinstein preparing his employee wages, 4 out of the 5 gunmen erupted into the office. De Castillo reached for his holster but couldn't grab his gun in time, and a hail of bullets tore through the air of the room. The officer was struck and hit the ground, but he got up to his knees in a second attempt to grab his weapon. But it was too late. He was shot again and died. Officer de Castillo was shot once in the leg and twice in the chest. He was the 7th out of 19 cops killed in the line of duty that year. In a calm manner, the gunmen turned, walked back to their accomplice at the elevator, went down to the ground floor, and sauntered to a waiting car. Interestingly, not a cent of the $7,500 on the table was touched by the gunman. This appeared to be a cold-blooded execution of an NYPD officer, and the fact that no money was taken led to speculation that this hit was personal. Police officer Walter Oliver de Castilla left behind a wife and a young child in Jamaica, Queens. The lift operator described the killers as young, early to mid-20s, dark-skinned with dark hair and all well-dressed. Carmine Galante was arrested and indicted for the murder 5 months later on August 30th, 1930. He was picked up for the killing along with Michael Consolo and Angelo Presenzano, but all were released for a lack of evidence. Michael Consolo would go on to become Carmine Galante's bodyguard, but he was killed in the Bonanno family civil war in 1968, receiving 2 bullets in the head and 4 in the back. Carmine Galante was in prison at the time of his friend's killing. Angelo Little Mo Presenzano, Galante's cousin, would go on to become a captain in the Bonanno family, and he was actually at Joe and Mary's Italian-American restaurant on the day of Galante's murder in 1979. However, luckily for Little Mo, he had been complaining of stomach cramps, and Carmine Galante sent his cousin home. A short time later, Galante and 2 of his other lunchtime companions, Leonard Coppola and Joe Turano, were shot to pieces. Back to 1930, and on Christmas Day, Detective Joseph Minahan spotted 4 men in a green sedan acting suspiciously on Driggs Avenue, Brooklyn. He approached the vehicle with his gun drawn when someone yelled from the car, "Stop right there, copper, or we'll burn you." A shootout ensued, and Detective Minahan's coat was turned into Swiss cheese, but surprisingly, he was only hit in the leg. However, a 6-year-old girl who was walking with her mother nearby was seriously wounded when she was struck by a bullet. The gunmen tried to escape in the sedan, but it wouldn't start, so they bailed from their car, and 3 of the 4 gangsters escaped by jumping onto a passing truck. The 4th shooter slipped and was captured by Minahan. The gangster was identified as Carmine Galante, and after his arrest he received a severe beating at the hands of the police. But he wouldn't reveal the identities of his accomplices, and in fact he never admitted to anything. Galante was later identified as a member of a gang that had previously robbed the Lieberman Brewery in Brooklyn. Galante went on trial and was sentenced to 12 years. On the 8th of January 1931, he was sent to Sing Sing prison and then later moved to Clinton prison in Dannemora until his release on May 1st, 1939. One can speculate that during his time at Dannemora, if he rubbed shoulders with the prison's most famous inmate, Charlie Luciano, who was imprisoned there at the same time. Interestingly, the 2 heavyweight mobsters were thought to have both been present at the famous mob meeting at the Grand Hotel in Palermo in 1957, along with Joe Bonanno and several powerful Sicilian mafiosi. Anyway, as we mentioned, Galante would come out of prison in 1939 and would continue his bloody rise up the higher echelons of organised crime. Unofficially, the police would eventually pin 80 murders on Carmine Galante. I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for watching.